My name's Chris Flynn. I'm the books editor at The Big Issue, and author myself. Recently brought out my first novel. Yay for me. That really wasn't necessary. It really wasn't that hard. It only took me... I say that, but I just turned 40, so maybe it was quite hard. It took me 20 years. Our guest tonight, Joshua Cody. Let me just flip over to my second page of my notes. I'm going to do the really boring bit, Josh, and read a little bit from your bio.
Okay.
Which you can correct me if there's any mistakes.
Okay, I will, yeah.
Joshua was about to receive his PhD when he was diagnosed with a particularly aggressive form of cancer. Now, he was facing a bone marrow transplant and full radiation treatment. And in his book, Sick, this beautiful Bloomsbury book, which is the Australian edition, the American edition's looks a little bit different to this, doesn't it?
The American edition looks like a taxi cab. Yeah,
right.
It's different. It's like a yellow taxi cab in New York.
That doesn't really make any sense, but...
No. Don't tell them that, though.
But yeah, the book the book charts his struggle and his fury and tendency to self-destruction after finding out he has cancer. Josh received his bachelor's degree in music composition from Northwestern University and his master's and doctoral degrees from Columbia. He's currently a composer living in New York City. And the book, which is a really fabulous book, I'm not much of a memoir reader, but I tore through this. It's a real rip-roaring adventure in many ways, as Josh rallies against the approach of what seems to be certain death, and also part Hunter S. Thompson-style meditation on mortality, fear, and literature, and the power of literature and music. It's a really wonderful book, and I'm very happy to be sitting here with him tonight. Could you please welcome Joshua Cody? Josh, there's a really extraordinary moment early on in this book. There's many moments where when I was reading it, I was actually jarred into stopping because of the very casual way you were talking about certain things. And a really early one is when you just drop into conversation that you're a relative of William Cody, i.e.
Yes.
Buffalo Bill Cody.
Buffalo Bill Cody, yes. Famous cowboy. That's right. That's where the name comes from. Yeah, yeah. He was my, I only met one member of my family, my Aunt Edna, who lived to be, like 108 years old or something ridiculous. And she lived in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is on the Minnesota border, which is a very beautiful marshland kind of city. And she knew him. He died, I think, in 1917. And he was an interesting guy. When I was growing up, in America, I keep forgetting I'm in Australia. It's so strange.
You're not in America now.
Yeah.
You're not in Kansas anymore.
We're not in Kansas anymore at all. Yeah. But there's an association for this guy, and it tends to be sort of libertarian and right wing. And it was bizarre growing up. I have to go to these things because my brother and I were the youngest descendants. We're not direct because that direct line went away at some point after, I don't know when that was. So we were like the next closest, and we were the youngest guys. So we have to stand up at these functions out in Phoenix or something, And I found the whole thing extremely embarrassing, and I think that's why I fled to Europe after college, was to kind of get out of that whole thing. But now I think it's interesting, I've since become a fan of Westerns and John Ford and, Deadwood, yeah, sure. Yeah, the inversions get a little irritating after a while, but it's still good. Yeah.
So you've probably been through this 1,000 times now since the book came out. But can you tell us a little bit about how this cancer that basically almost wiped you out began in such an innocuous manner?
Yeah, and I don't really get into the I just had this thing called Hodgkin's lymphoma, which usually is quite treatable. Especially now, it wasn't as recently as 20 years ago, but now it is. And my understanding of it, not being an oncologist and not having studied medicine or oncology, is that it's a mutation in the DNA, which means that it resurfaces every few generations, It is non-lifestyle based. So, for example, it doesn't have to do with ingesting in any way a carcinogen like smoking can cause lung cancer,
right, yeah.
that type of thing. And it's rare. It's about 1% of all, less than 1% of all cancers, and it might even be a tiny percentage of cancers of the blood. It's different, from my understanding, it's different than leukemia or others because it actually creates a mutant lymphocyte, a mutant white blood cell, which then the body treats as an antibody, then the immune system goes crazy. But it's not, it doesn't cause a tumor. It causes what they call a liquid tumor. And I guess there's some degree of controversy as to whether it should really be called a cancer or not. Anyway, but usually it's treatable with 6 months of chemo, which is, I found quite easy to do. I found the shock of the diagnosis very scary, and I had a hard time with that emotionally because when you're pretty young, you don't expect that, and it's alienating. And but the actual chemo I was fine with. When that doesn't work, though, then and the success rate for that is very high. It's like 90% or something. But when that doesn't work, then the success rate goes down considerably. Very scary, and even the bone marrow transplant is dangerous because it can kill you. I mean, it brings your system down to a stage very near death, and then they have to monitor you very closely, and then they give you a big chemo wash. And then they have to put the stem cells that they've removed back in, and then the stem cells have to go back and find their way back into the bone marrow. And then that's a process called regrafting. And then at that point, the immune system begins to...
reboot.
Yeah, right, essentially, exactly, that's what it is, yeah. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So that was the situation with that. Yeah.
Didn't it just start with a pain in your neck?
No, there's no pain. If something hurts, it's fine. And that's the thing for all you out there. But yeah, get it checked out if something doesn't hurt. That's bad. That's bad. Yeah, just a little thing in the neck, and what it does is it just builds up. These cells start fighting each other, and so that's why it's called a liquid tumor. That's why you can't do surgery for it, because it's just, like in the lymphatic system, it's, kind of coagulates there and builds up. And
it's just fluid, is it?
It's just fluid, essentially, is what it is, yeah. But it's like a traffic jam, and, yeah, luckily, you want to catch it early on, and if it's detectable, if it's close to the skin, then that's good because you can see that it's there. And sometimes it can grow and you don't know that it's there, and so then that's of course worse because then, like all cancers, it's staged, and when you catch it at an earlier stage, then you have a better chance of survival. So that was the scenario.
Yeah, you were only 34 at the time, is that right? And how old are you now?
I just turned 41.
That's a bit of an indiscreet question, isn't it?
That's okay. It's probably online.
Probably should have checked.
Wait, yeah, so I was 30, but this was 5 years ago. I was 35 then? Let's see. I just got my 5-year remission thing last week in New York. Right. But they date that from, I don't know where they date that from, because the whole process took 2 years anyway for like kind of being in the hospital. So it was very jarring and obviously a very unusual thing to happen. And
and in the early months, though, after you were diagnosed and you were just doing the chemo treatment, which is a pretty standard response to those sort of things, you did go off the deep end a little bit, didn't you? You did lead a much more hedonistic lifestyle during those months.
Yeah, I did. I sort of went nuts, and it was just the way that I sort of dealt with it. Now, these are elements in the book that I decided to include. The book is 260 pages long, and if I was really writing like a documentary, it would just be more of me sitting there on the couch, asleep after chemo for like 12 hours. That wouldn't have been an interesting book. So I kind of put the exciting things in, But yeah, that was my initial reaction, was to sort of, instead of, say, meditate or eat a bunch of cabbage or do yoga or herbal tea or these things that some people do, or chamomile, stuff like that. I just sort of went out and I suppose I was in a form of denial at that point, and I described that early in the book. Also, I was. I have to say that I wasn't. I must have a pretty good constitution because I didn't mind the chemo, so I didn't have. So there's a weird normalization that I attempt to convey in the book, which happens in the hospital too. They try to socialize the experience to make it less alienating, and I think that that's what I was trying to do too. So I was going out to the pub and having Guinnesses and hang out with friends and sort of pretending that nothing was going on. Then there's a sort of a relationship between Eros and Thanatos where I was sort of aggressively dating, which I actually usually don't do, but in this case I was. And so there's obviously Freudian, reason for that. You're sort of grasping for life. So
there's that fabulous sort of almost surreal passage where you seem to be, you walk out the middle of a chemo session, you're just sort of fed up with it. You go and get drunk, you do some coke in the toilet of a bar, and then you wind up getting propositioned on the street by an extraordinarily beautiful woman who just wants to have sex with you right there and then.
I couldn't not write about that because I wasn't trying to turn it into like penthouse forum. It actually did happen, and it was very strange. And she was a very, very, very nice woman. But that was very unusual. Obviously, when I was writing the book, I must say I had no idea what I was doing, and I never wanted to be a writer, and I never thought that I'd be a writer, and I never intended this to be published or really show it to anyone. I just kept this journal when I was in the regrafting process, and I just was writing about it because I was there for months, and it's so boring. And then I started playing around with words, and then it started forming this book. But I thought I was probably going to die, and so I just sort of threw it all in there, and
because you were
didn't think twice about it.
You were keeping those notebooks throughout it, and there's great photographs of the notebooks in the book where you get to see your actual handwriting and almost indecipherable passages where you're clearly off your head.
Morphine.
Was it your intention during that time when you were keeping the notebooks? Did you think, well, if I make it through this, maybe I could write about this?
No. I think it was an attempt to stay sane and to use language to. I looked at language in a very different way than I had before because I was coming from music, and I was always thinking about music, and I wasted my whole life studying music. Well, not a waste. It was fun to study music, and I love studying music. But written language is a vastly different act of communication, and one that I think grounds us more in. It does. It's less insane, I think. Well, Derrida said that all writing is insane, but I think writing music is really insane, and also very inefficient. It's a very inefficient means of communication because you have to write the notes on the paper, and then you give them to the musicians, and they have to learn how to think, and then you do the concert and rehearse and conduct. So I think it was just to kind of keep my head above water, and that's the only thing that I was doing. If you have episodes of delusion on morphine, which is common, if you write about that, then I think it's the same reason that people keep diaries or journals anyway. And I've been an assiduous diarist sort of since when I was very young, so that was not new to me at all. But I certainly never thought that I was writing a book. I didn't think about that until. Well, after I showed it to a friend of mine who was an author, who said, well, you have a pretty good book. This could be a good book. And I said, okay. And she said, well, do you mind if I send it to my editor at HarperCollins? And I said, okay. So she did. And they liked it too. They said, no, this is actually a very good book. And we'd like to publish this. And I thought, of course, they were just being nice because, you know, when you're sick and you have cancer and everyone's just nice. And, you know. And so, but my friend said, no, wouldn't say that. You know, they just give you a rejection letter. Like they'd say, I'm glad you're doing okay. But
sorry about the cancer and here.
Right, yeah. But so then that was when I realized that it could be an interesting book. But then I needed an agent, and then I had to get an agent. Then I sort of had to become a writer. Yeah. But then at that point, I started looking at it as a book, and then I sort of forgot about the fact that it was about cancer, but it was about illness in a more general sense, and that the voice of the book is not quite my own, but I tapped into some kind of a manic voice somewhere inside my head that was some part of consciousness that was kind of like a survival mode, right. Linguistically, and once I got that voice, then that carried me through the shape of the book, and then I had a pretty easy. I don't know, it was easy, but I envisioned the form pretty quickly of the whole thing, with the way it would start with a little introduction and sort of a bridge in the middle, not unlike a piece of music, which is all I had to go on, really, because that's the only art that I'd studied, and then kind of a coda at the end and a high point before that. And so in that sense, it's really no different than any other book, let's say fiction. I'm writing a book of fiction now, as you just did, and I'm not the first writer to say that, you know, the first part is if you get that voice, if you can get a handle on that register, then you're there, and then you start writing in that persona, you know, to use Pound's word.
That's about as far as I got with my book, was just finding the voice, and then after that...
That's what it is. Yeah, so then we get into this whole thing about memoir, and whether or not this should be called a memoir or not, I don't think of it as a memoir, and I don't identify with the author in a way as myself, but part of myself, or a self. But when I write in the book that, you know, when he says, the author, that this is the only book he's going to write, he, whoever that is, that voice, that's true. And I think we've had enough of him. It's 260 pages of this. That's enough. You know, now we got a whole other book coming out, so it's going to be fine.
And the narrator of the book also has a bit of a go at this style of memoir, which follows a very sort of strict template usually. Could you just read this passage for us, which gives us a little bit of a taste, which is...
what we talked about before.
Yeah, where he's raging against memoirs.
Okay. Right. And here this text was intended as a riposte to the literature of disease. So many of those books I read at the beginning of the whole thing, and none of them any help. Pure dreck, pale pastel book after book on the shelves in the chains that probably sell scented candles, not just to increase revenue, but to mask the smell of paper. Pale pastel book after book, each one the same. The 3-act structure of 1, diagnosis, and 2, the discovery of how beautiful life actually is, and how there's more to it than my hedge fund job ever told me it was. And look at how lovely this flower is, and this butterfly, and this herbal tea. And 3, recovery and a book deal and getting a little place in Vermont, maybe. If there are some who require disease to teach them such things, then fine. But I was not one of those. Thank you very much. I loved life and found beauty and sources of pleasure in things on the outside and on the inside. And illness was not an opportunity for existential awakenings. It was the very opposite of beauty or grace. It was a harrowing, a descensus, and then went down. That's a Pound quote, so that refers to something before. The principal emotions were terror and above all rage, but never a death wish. I talked about suicide before, so that's that. And then I suppose I have to grudgingly admit that there may be something about coming out on the other side, like the morning I woke up and impulsively grabbed a bottle of Evian and drank, and it was the first time in months that I could swallow. Or not too long after that, when I could swallow food. It didn't matter that I threw it up immediately, just the fact that I could swallow food. And then, not too long after that, walking outside alone in the air, 2 blocks through the bright mist to my cafe, where I walked indoors, ordered a coffee, and trembling, took it outside and sat down at the cheap little table with my notebook like a normal person. And an old man, walking slowly by, warmly remarked, "Now that's the life." He was right. Those 2 blocks that morning were a voyage to Cythera, an epic journey to an island, Myrtle Green, and back. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about your parents. Your father was a prolific writer, wasn't he? A very prolific and talented writer, but he never really published anything.
No, he never published. But this is interesting, and the coda of the book really has to do with family at the end of it. It becomes sort of a meditation, and just an essay on family. My father was a great guy, and he was a businessman, and but a serious writer and reader, but he did not pursue it academically or otherwise. And he always said, I don't want to be John Updike. I'm fine. And I didn't know that this was unusual at all. I kind of thought that everybody in Milwaukee had. Milwaukee is a strange city, by the way. It has little weird things going on. Maybe like this city. I have that sense, having been here about 48 hours. I've seen some weird little things. And so I suppose it's kind of quirky and everything, but he wrote prodigiously, and we have tons and tons and tons, thousands of paper, pages, tens of thousands of manuscripts, and what was I going to say? I can't remember now. The film breaks, as they say. So I got a lot of exposure to literature through him. Yeah.
And you inherited his notebooks too, have you? It's kind of ironic for you because you've got these almost indecipherable notebooks from your time in hospital, and then later on in life you inherited your father's almost indecipherable notebooks about his life.
Right, and I print an excerpt of one of them in the book, and it's a very funny thing that he wrote. It started, he wrote this sort of eccentric collage of junk mail, and it was this essay on junk mail. But it starts that way, but then it ends up being about the dissolution of a marriage, the dissolution of my parents' marriage. So it's a sort of interesting, journey in that sense too.
Because he died before you were diagnosed.
Yeah, he died in 2001.
Yeah. But your mother features heavily too, and she was present throughout the treatment. She seemed to be always there, hovering by the bed, and seemed to understand what was going on a very primal level.
Yeah.
I like the passage where you have gone a bit crazy in your apartment and smashed everything.
Yeah.
And she turns up and there's glass everywhere, and it doesn't even faze her at
No,
all.
she didn't mind. Yeah, she didn't mind. But these things, of course, I know. These drugs are very powerful because not only are you on chemo, but you're on all sorts of other things that they give you to get through the chemo, and they're psychoactive. So all this stuff is actually normal, even though it doesn't seem like it. But she was terrific. She was unfazed, and you need someone there to help you through this stuff. You can't. You can't do it. You can't walk for a while. This is a really heavy-duty salvage treatment is what they call it, and so it's a big deal. So it was great that she was there. It was also great that she, it turns out, is not a bad writer herself. And, my dad was a little bit more kind of flamboyant about his taste for literature, and but she kept a journal in the hospital. And one of the things that was nice about that was that I can use that as a counterpoint to my own writing. When I was having a terrifically profound morphine delusion, in which I literally thought that I was living in a different time, different place, that I was a different nationality, that I was married, that my parents had met in Alexandria in 1914 or something. And the whole thing was amazing. And counterpoint to this is my mom's writing, which is rational and lucid and very well done. And in the United States, the New Yorker, their review of the book, they really liked her writing, like they didn't say this, but they liked her writing more than mine. You know? And so I called her up when the review came out, and I said, yeah, did you see the New Yorker? She said, no, I haven't seen it yet. I haven't read it yet. And I said, well, the review's in there, and they really like your writing. And she goes, well, that's very nice of you to say, honey. I said, no, I'm not just saying that. It's in there, and they love your writing. They say nice things about it. Well, that's sweet of you to say. I'm like, no, it actually is in the New Yorker. Do you have enough money? So she didn't really get it.
It's a bit of a contentious notion. I'm curious about the fact that she was present throughout and witness to the sort of nightmare that you were going through.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem to faze her because it's an awkward notion, and it's a bit of a strange question, but I'm thinking of your fellow patient, Sarah, right. I'm not sure, who didn't make it.
Right.
She died, and her partner was there to experience all of that. And because she was there witnessing it, she wound up in a psychiatric ward.
Yeah.
And the question I guess I want to ask, which freaks me out asking it, but do you think it's a good thing that people are present because there was a good chance that you were going to die?
Yeah.
And it's not just you who dies then, they get a bit destroyed as well. Obviously you want them there, but at the same time, is it a good thing that they're there?
Boy, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And of course, we can sit here and talk about it hypothetically, but when situations like this actually do occur in life, everything is always too late, and you don't have time to make any rational decision at all. And when they find out that you have something like this, my hospital in New York, I mean, it was just like before you know it, you're in there. And so that's it. So I don't know. I write about that in the book, and the problem with, no parent wants to see a child die. That's not the order of things. That is very unnatural, that should happen. And no mother wants to see her son die or even really be that sick. And in a certain way, at a certain level, you're fine because you don't know what's going on. I thought I was a Hungarian Jew writing music journalism in Budapest in 1968, so I was all right, And, so her sort of, her self-command was extremely impressive. And that was not the case for, a fellow patient of mine who we'll call Sarah, who did die, and then she was a lesbian, and so her partner was institutionalized after the whole thing because she just couldn't handle it at all. I don't know. Some friends you lose because it's just too weird for them, and then some you gain also. I will say that women tend to be much better, not to, and we got Janet Winterson coming in later in the week, but at least in my experience, women handled all of this stuff much, much, much better than men. And a bunch of nurses and also doctors attested to this fact. Slightly bewildered at it, too. I don't think that, we can ask ourselves, I suppose, why that would be, but that would take a psychologist or a sociologist.
Well, women do play a very central role in the book.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the doctor of your pain management team, because obviously you get it's a bit of a strange notion, this whole team who are there to manage your levels of pain and how much pain are you currently in and how much pain should you be in, and your mother's there telling them, no, he's in too much pain at the moment.
Yeah.
But the doctor and your pain management team, of course, you ended up in a relationship with her.
Yes.
And she saw you at maybe not your best. How did earth did this eventuate? I know you're an attractive man, but I'm just but you were there. You'd lost your hair and everything.
I don't know.
I know the bald men are pretty hot. I know, but
yeah, that must have been it. That was it. The no hair factor. Well, a lot of this stuff I had to sort of change in the book, but this was a sort of an interesting thing that happened. I happened to have when I was going through this entire experience, which went over the course of a few years. So this is not. Let's not get the wrong idea here. Franzen said it, not the quote that they use on the book, but another one. He said this is a book by a moderately deranged writer. Just moderately. It's not that bad. But the characters in the book happen to be women, and they represent certain themes. I'm not reducing them, and I don't mean to diminish them in any way. They were friends, and sometimes they were more than friends. Obviously, relationships change when you're going through an illness such as this. The self-image changes. The body literally changes. The sense of the body changes. The relationship to sexuality changes. All of these things I thought were certainly valid topics of investigation in a work like this. In the case of the woman that were in question, we became very close for some reason. And she was, certainly saw me at my worst, and then I started to recover, and then ironically it turned out that she sort of had some problems of her own, which I go into in the book, and I'm
sure did.
Yeah, and so there you're sort of, it's interesting because there's a paradox in the sense that this is a professional MD who studied medicine and who's devoted her life to helping the ill, although physically ill. She herself was emotionally unwell, and the blindness and the lack of self-regard that she had, where she would, on occasion, recognize this just as a glimmer that would sort of pass over her face, and then she'd realize that she had some problems, but then that would fade immediately. So there are sort of two forms of denial going on here, and it makes a nice kind of musical or artistic form, as one is sort of going up and the other is sort of going down. So in terms of drama, it works too.
It is a very dramatic sequence in the book, and particularly when when that relationship comes to a culmination, where you're awaiting the test results to see if you've got the all clear, and that extraordinary scene where she walks into the restaurant where you're extras on a movie or something, and she flips out completely.
Yeah, she flips out completely. Yeah,
and
now we're not making value judgments here, and because we don't want to be sued, and Bloomsbury, So I don't, I'm not a clinician, so I don't know. But yeah, she flipped out, but some people flip out.
But there's other. It's a great passage because there's the sense that she might actually know the results of your test.
Sure.
And decide to just take the high road.
Sure.
With the results in her.
Well, that's of course what I thought, because she had access to medical records, and so what I thought was that she there's sort of a pivotal CAT scan that they give you after this big bone marrow transplant to find out if it worked, and because it's a bone marrow transplant, it's salvage treatment. That's about all you can do. If that doesn't work, then that's about it. Then it's palliative, and then it's the end of the road, and then you're going to die, and you don't want to die. I mean, I found that out too. I didn't want to die. There's another character in the book, a friend of mine who was a cancer patient, and she's earlier in the book.
And Carmilla.
She didn't care if she died. She was like, and we talk about that in the book. So but I didn't want to die, and so I was of course scared that it didn't work, and so the person in question, who I call Nathaniel, I think is how it's pronounced. It's a diminutive of not her real name, and I sort of squeezed all the words together. Yeah. But it's never been pronounced, because it's a book not to be read aloud, believe me. It's rated R. It's also a fun book. I hope we're not giving you the wrong... It should be a fun, short, kind of interesting book. It's not like this horrific thing. But yeah, Nefarial, I thought Nefarial had the results, and they were bad, and she flipped out, and that's why she flipped out, and then I got upset, and I called a friend of mine, and that's when I went into the restaurant. We sat next to Chelsea Clinton, who of course is, who Chelsea Clinton is, and that's another thing I've been accused of name dropping, and I'm not name dropping, because in this situation where I think that I'm gonna die, and this woman that I've been trusting has totally flipped out, how often does that happen in one's life? And then how often does that happen and you're in a restaurant and you're seated next to Chelsea Clinton? Why am I not going to put that in the book? I can't make that up. And I don't say I'm friends with Chelsea Clinton. No. I'm not bragging about the fact that I'm hanging out with Chelsea. I just happen to be sitting next to Chelsea Clinton. And when I then thought I was okay and then had a panic attack and ran out of this restaurant, which is what I did, I'll bet that Chelsea remembers that. But everything turned out fine. For her, too. She's married now. Very attractive woman in real life. She's a completely nice person. She's with, a friend of hers and another couple, and they seem to be having a very nice conversation.
They were having a nice time up to a point.
They must have been having a nice time. Yeah, I felt bad, obviously. You feel bad when you're not in control of your emotions, not in control of your body. And as anyone here can imagine, or if anyone has been through stuff like this, you're not in control of any of this, which again is why we go back to language and attempt to regain some kind of control of our existence on some intellectual, spiritual level, if you like.
The role of literature and music seems to play a big part in the book as well.
The what?
The role of literature and music, particularly Ezra Pound, who's an interesting character in himself, because he spent, 50 years writing the cantos, and was in prison for 12 years for treason, is that right? Yeah. Because he made anti-Semitic broadcasts during World War II.
Yeah, Pound works in here in the following way, and somebody said, one of the reviews said, well, he's inexplicably obsessed with Ezra Pound, and I'm not obsessed with Ezra Pound. I talk about Pound in the book because I think he's a really interesting poet, and the book is not a long book, so once you bring up someone like Ezra Pound, you bring back the figure in so many ways. His which I could go on, you have to read the book, but he had obviously a problem with the anti-Semitism. He had a definition of where language should be in our lives that was very helpful to me. Although his views were politically abhorrent, he went through a terrible traumatic time when he was imprisoned, which I compare in a way to being in the hospital. So there are many things that you can sort of talk about here. But I'm not obsessed with Ezra Pound. Like, I don't go around. And you'd think that from this, I can't remember what review it was, like he's obsessed with Ezra Pound. Like, it's all he thinks about Ezra Pound. That's not the case. I think about many other things besides Ezra Pound. But you can't, my new book does not mention Ezra Pound. There's no Ezra Pound in it at all. You don't have to worry about that, But I say in there, and it's sort of in jest, and it's sort of, but I think I say something like, I propose that Pound is the emblematic artist of the 20th century, in that he, at the age of 15, he wanted to know more about poetry than any man alive by 30, and he did. And he created the English that we use, essentially. If you think about all of modernism, then he, Joyce and Yeats and Hemingway and Eliot, that's an important figure. And then World War II happened, and he went insane. And he was simultaneously on the shortlist for the Nobel Prize and perhaps going to be executed for treason, you know. And to me, this is the most extraordinary story of, you know, a very strange and extraordinary century in America and Europe. So, you know, and my dad was a big Pound lover. Also, you know, the poetry is so beautiful. I mean, he was so gifted. So, it's a shout out for him too.
It does seem like quite a nice little parallel to what was going on for you, because you were essentially losing language whenever you were in the hospital. And when you look at your journals from that time, your notebooks, the earlier parts when you're just doing your treatments, your notebooks, they're obviously very complete. But during that time when you're totally out of it, but you're still making notes, they're scary.
No, you can't even read it.
You know, it's really scary where you seem to be thinking quite a lot, but when you try to sum it up on the page, there's very little written there.
Yeah, no, you think you're writing The Tempest, and then, you know, you look back when you come out of this morphine thing, and it's like this little mark, you know, and your sense of time is, and I put that in the book, too, as a kind of a graphology thing. Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's bizarre.
Do you think you went insane during that time?
God, I don't know. Not according to, not according to my fans. I don't know. I mean, I think that, you know, well, yeah, I mean, clinically, I had post-traumatic stress, which is pretty normal for this type of situation. So, but I mean, we can figure this out. I guess we're smart, right? Insanity is not being able to tell. I mean, I had a psychotic episode where I, you know, had a different notion of reality. I didn't think that what was real was actually real.
Well,
so
you were convinced that you were in Budapest.
Yeah,
and
I knew what street I was on. It was just amazing. I thought I was sort of a long story, but I put it in there. But I thought that the hospital thing was just a sham because I had written an article about two Hungarian composers, one of whom emigrated to the West and was Jewish, and the other stayed in Hungary. And I was not making a political statement at all about these two composers, both of whom are real, and this actually happened. And the prime minister at the time, János Kadar, his office called me up and they said, well, we're going to, you know, this isn't a dissident work and your article is fine, but we don't want people to get the wrong idea that this is fine. We want to, you know, keep people here. So we're going to pretend to put you in the hospital and that'll, you know, this is goulash communism. And so that'll send a signal out that you shouldn't write, and no one else should write too much about Ligeti, the guy that defected and went to Vienna and then Germany. And so that's really what I thought, and that's the delusion part. And then I thought that it was in there for a week, and then the whole thing was fake, and then we were going to go home on Friday night, and there was going to be a car outside at midnight, and then on Friday at midnight, I'm like, okay, here we can go. And I stood up, and my mom was there, and I'm like, yeah, we can go. And she's like, no, you can't go. You have to stay in the hospital. I'm like, no, they're just making that up. That's just a story that they're creating, you know. And then I thought, oh my God, they brainwashed my mom, and so now I got to deal with that. So not only do I have to like kind of get her out of here, and then I started taking all these IVs out of my chest. There's blood everywhere, and then these nurses like pinned me down in the bed, and then it was a very dramatic moment where I'm like, oh yeah, my mom is right. Yeah, I'm actually in New York, and so it's fun stuff. Yeah.
It's a fantastic chapter called Sister Morphine.
Yeah.
Which when I first began reading it, I thought, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why are we suddenly in Budapest? It's an extraordinary chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got about 10 minutes left. I can't really see anybody, but we do have microphones, I believe. Yes, microphones here and here. There's the lights. If any of you would like to ask a question, would you like to approach our microphones, or or call them to you. I can't really see if you're putting your hands up. Anyone got any questions for Josh? Oh, there's one here. Oh, can you get to it?
It's hard to see.
Totally contrary to what we agreed.
Thanks, Joshua, for really interesting and generous conversation. Interesting to hear that you're writing a novel now, and I just wanted to ask, when did you realise you would keep writing, and how different is it tackling fiction?
Okay. Well, I had a really good time writing this. I just thought it was so much fun, and even though it's about like dark subject matter and, you know, but it's really not, I don't think it's a depressing, it's a depressing book.
No, it's not depressing.
I don't think it's depressing.
I thought it was good fun, and I felt guilty for feeling that.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff and funny characters, and there's a girl that I knew that she's completely nuts. I mean, hilarious, and you know,
it was quite an exciting book to read. There was a real sort of narrative drive to it.
Yeah, and so then when I realized that I had so much of a good time writing it, I thought to myself, well, if anything happens with this, then you know, I should write another one, because I thought, well, one or two things are going to happen. Well, you know, maybe nobody will care about it, but at least I should start another one now. I don't know what I was thinking, really. I guess I was just thinking, well, when we started getting some comments from some people and they said, yeah, this is pretty good, you know. I mean, some people didn't think it was that good, but some people said it was really good. And Norton and Bloomsbury said it was you know, a nice book. And
look, it's good, all right. It is.
Yeah,
good.
so it was fun, you know. And so then, then when I realized that it was actually going to come out, here's what I'm saying, is that I thought that what would happen to it would be that a very small press in America would print like maybe 3,000 copies of it, and it would be experimental fiction, and that would be great. But, you know, nothing would change, and that would be it. And when I realized that that wasn't going to be the case, that it was actually like a real book that was going to like be reviewed in the New York Times, these big, because I'm from Milwaukee, so it's a big deal to have your picture in the New York Times. It's like, it makes it seem like it's a real book. It's not, but you know, it makes it seem like it is. And then you're here like doing readings like this in Australia, and it's, you know, it makes it seem like you're an actual author. You know, and in a way you are, because there is this book. So
yeah, I've read it.
Yeah. So, you know, this is not a delusion. And so when I figured out that would, you know, be the case, then I said to myself, well, I better start another book before this gets really kind of weird. And so I did. And so that's the second book.
It's going to get worse for you, though, isn't it? Because we talked a little bit before. This could be a movie as well.
They're talking about making a movie of it. Yes. That would be even weirder. It would be about me. It'd be strange. Yeah. So we don't know. So I was in LA just a couple days ago dealing with that, and it could be an interesting movie. You know, I like movies. Yeah.
Any other questions, folks? Oh, you can see better than I. You're a lazy bunch. You're supposed to walk to the mic.
Thanks. Is that up? Yeah, I was really interested by your comment regarding writing as a sort of form of control, like during your period of illness. Because the only time I've ever actually spontaneously written was when I was sort of lost in northern Mozambique, totally isolated, without any money, possibly stuck there forever and ever. And out of sort of fear and necessity, I started writing. And for me, it was kind of a form of, I guess, escapism, trying to forget the horrible situation that I was in, and write to sort of somehow, elevate myself out of that. But then maybe that is a sort of a form of control in a way. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that sort of, those sort of responses to really
You've answered your own question more beautifully than I could, but that's when Auden speaks of the shield of Achilles. That's what he means, which I actually talk about in there too. That's that's exactly what it is. You know, or Eliot, humankind cannot bear very much reality. I mean, that's why we have art. And in that sense, you know, I always felt, I mean, I guess I talk about this a little bit in the book, but I always thought I used to work in a bank, and I always thought I'd be working in a bank because that's what we do now, is we work in banks or work for banks. And so I always felt very guilty about studying or liking literature and music and opera and all that kind of stuff. And what you're speaking of, and kind of what I'm speaking of, is actually there is a sort of practical application to all this stuff, which can be self-serving.
Any other questions, folks? No more questions. Oh, there's one. Oh, there's two suddenly. Yep. When you give last orders, you suddenly get two questions. There's one over there. Yeah.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks, Chris. Joshua, I just wanted to ask, did you have health insurance?
I did, yeah.
But this cost a lot of money, didn't it?
Yeah. It's very expensive.
How much did you spend? $1 million?
Yeah.
$1 million.
A lot of money, yeah. Which is awful. And, you know, I mean, I had a whole other thing in the book where I thought that this was half the book when I submitted it to my agency. Because I didn't think anybody would care about this. It's kind of like poetic lyricism. And, the second part of the book was going to be about the healthcare stuff in the United States and insurance and weird stories that I have. But they said this was good enough, so I'm like, all right, fine. But yeah, it's I could go on and on and on about the it's awful. Well, I mean, as you people know, there's a big debate going on in America right now about health insurance, and that's a whole other conversation. But
what would have happened to you if you didn't have health insurance?
It's a really good question. You know, you've, like everything in the United States, there's always some weird loophole, and I think you just declare bankruptcy and then you're fine. You can't, refuse. They can't refuse treatment. You've got a situation where I went to a specialized hospital which only deals with cancer, and it's very famous. I'm not allowed to say what it is, but I'm sure you probably know what it is. And you've got very wealthy people that go there from all over the world. Middle East. I remember a guy like in a room with, he must have been a sheik or something, and he had like 9 veiled wives and stuff. And now these people pay in cash, so there are many, many millions and millions of dollars going in and out of this institution every day.
Like a casino.
Yeah, just like a casino, like that thing in the Scorsese movie. They follow the thing. Yeah. I have a funny story about that, which I can't tell, but it's a strange situation. So there's in the States, there's always a way to sort of, but it's not a good way, and it would have been very dangerous, I think, financially, obviously. Now, when you're actually talking about, or at least I wasn't really thinking about money at all, because I just wanted to live. I just didn't want to die, and so it kind of gets thrown out the window. But if you have money, then they will take it. If you don't, then they won't. And that's America.
That's great. I think that's the perfect way to end. It's 7:30, folks, so we're going to have a half-hour break. If you want to convene to the foyer, use the bathrooms, smoke a cigar, whatever it is that your thing is, buy a book, and